Um, Good afternoon, all the participants, and welcome back to day 5 of the second week of the training session. मेरे ख्याल से कल मैडम ने आप सबको अप्राइज किया था, तो आप सबने अपना फीडबैक जो है भरना शुरू कर दिया है।
यस सर।
और लेकिन टॉपिक अभी तक शेयर नहीं किया है, जो ग्रुप प्रेजेंटेशन होना है आपका लास्ट डे में। तो वो अभी तक टॉपिक किसी ने भी मेरे ख्याल से ग्रुप में शेयर नहीं किया है। तो वो भी आप लोगों से रिक्वेस्ट है कि भाई वो भी डिसाइड करके आप लोग जो है ग्रुप में शेयर कर दें एट द अर्लीस्ट। ठीक है,
ठीक है।
सबको
ओके
आ
सर।
रही है आवाज?
यस
और
सर। यस सर।
भाई सब वीडियो ऑन कर
यस।
लें, कल मैडम ने भी कहा था, क्योंकि जो हमारे रिसोर्स पर्सन हैं उनको भी लगे कि भाई ठीक है, कोई है सामने में जिनसे हम इंटरेक्ट कर रहे हैं। और दूसरा, बार बार ये जो रिक्वेस्ट की जा रही है कि सेशन को इंटरेक्टिव बनाएं। और आज का जो सेशन है हमारा ऑन जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया है उसके ऊपर है। और हमारे बीच में जो हमारे रिसोर्स पर्सन हैं डॉक्टर प्रशांत बर्तवाल जी हैं, जो प्रेजेंटली अरविंदो कॉलेज यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ दिल्ली में हैं। सर के नंबर ऑफ रिसर्च पेपर्स जो हैं इस बारे में, जो साउथ एशियन स्टडीज है, सुबेटलन स्टडीज है, इन सब में सर का जो है आया हुआ है। और सर जो है लाइफ टाइम मेंबर है प्रेस एसोसिएशन ऑफ इंडिया के और इंडियन पॉलिटिकल साइंस एसोसिएशन के। तो सर को बहुत ही वास्ट एक्सपीरियंस में है, और हमारे लिए अपॉर्चुनिटी है कि सर हमारे बीच में अपना जो कीमती समय लेकर आए हैं और हमें कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ऑफ इंडिया के बारे में बताएंगे। इससे जो पहले मैं सेशन शुरू करूं, मैं सर को जरा फ्लावर पॉट देके करना चाहूंगा। सर, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। थैंक यू। सामने स्क्रीन पे भी रिप्ले नाउ ओवर टू यू सर। यूज दैट आल्सो। हाँ जी, ओके, ठीक है।
So, good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible to everyone?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
यस यस सर। यस सर।
Thank you. Uh, Thank you for the introduction, brief introduction. So, without going into any formalities, let's start with the today's session, which is an introduction to the Indian Constitution. I believe there is no harm to ask to begin, to be precise, by asking a question to all the participants. Are you all aware about what exactly the Constitution is? Is there anyone who can just explain the word Constitution in a statement, in a line, or simply in a words? Anyone?
The governing guideline which define the object to run a state or union or country.
Okay, governing guidelines. Cool. May I know what sort of governing guidelines we are actually referring? Because if there are any sort of governing guidelines by any institution or any leadership, or say for any government, so governing guidelines is like simply saying in a very hastened manner. Before entering into that domain where we are actually looking for the governing guidelines, there is a need to understand the Constitution is nothing but a true legal format or a reflection of what we all genuinely called it by the name of a contract, a social contract, by following the same principle of contractualist tradition. Now, the thing is very important to understand what sort of contract we are talking about and who are actually the parties in that, right? Because we need to know that among whom this contract actually take place, who are the signatories, who actually permit them or authorize the members or anyone else who are in the part of the contract to do that. If you notice the preamble of the Indian Constitution, say for the very first thing is we the people of India. Now, what exactly the word we the people of India means? Who authorized them to call that we the people of India? That means that they, all the members of the Constituent Assembly, they have the right to form it, to present, to write, to moderate, to edit, to rectify, and all the things. Who authorized them? It was not just that all the members who were the part of the freedom struggles against the colonial empire, they got the power by themselves. No, it is certainly not like that. But if there are any point on this discussion, so there is a need to understand that we the people reflects the true democratic nature of the state. And let me just tell you, to be precise, that this democratic feature has nothing relation and no relation, to be precise, with the ancient roots. Rather, this democratic feature, which the maximum in today's context, the political system used, is purely based on the modern political system, which actually established by the Renaissance period, or you can say the post-Westphalia Treaty, or simply, to be precise, after the Industrial Revolution in a layman perspective. Generally, what the democracy means, we generally followed the democratic perception mean by through the Abraham Lincoln's quote, for the people, of the people, and eventually by the people. But this word democracy, if we simply bifurcate or try to explain the word democracy, what exactly it is, it simply focus. Cracy means a mode of system or a phenomena or a process, where the demo means people, the human beings, right? So that we need to understand that all the system which are controlled, which is for the people, and which will be controlled and functioned by further by only the people, that is, as per the biological meaning, the Homo sapiens or the humans. But the ancient perspective of the democracy, nowadays, it has become more important to understand that democracy is not a new connotation which emerged after 16th century. This democracy was present even in the ancient times, especially in Indian context, because right now we are discussing the constitution, Indian constitution, and this introduction of the Indian constitution, to be precise. So the democracy in Indian context is very old concept, not just present in the ancient time, but also present in the medieval time also. It is quite surprising for many that democracy was present in the medieval time. Yes, indeed. Democracy was in medieval time also, but with different names, with different perceptions, with different situations, with different implications. Now coming back to the Indian constitution once again. Some important points which we need to understand, that if constitution is a contract, so why people needs to follow that contract? So for that, we need to understand the formation of the state, because it was generally assumed by many political scientists and constitutionalists that state needs to be maintained by rule and law, rule of law, to maintain the peace and order, harmony, not discord. But the fact is quite clear. How will all the individuals who used to live under the specific territories of the state will follow the state guidelines, and under which specific circumstances, that we need to understand. And for that, state needs to maintain or to create an imperative document or set of document which has the ability to control all sort of different perception, or rather these all different perception need to be concise at one place. I'm not focusing and I'm not saying that state will eventually force you or simply direct you to maintain the uniformity. If there is any sort of pressure by the state, government, or leadership, and that actually pressurizes any individual, society, or community to be line up in a uniform manner, eventually that thing is against of democratic feature. But some things needs to be in a importantly in directed manner, in a queue system where all individuals needs to work simultaneously for the welfare project or for the welfare objective of the state. That is most important thing. Because any state, whether it is the pre-colonial state, whether it is the colonial state, whether it is the post-colonial nature state, whether it is the modern or the post-modern state, every state needs to focus one thing, and everyone has a very common agenda or objective, that is to provide the governance, which nowadays we are calling good governance, rather to provide governance and to provide an unbiased sort of the welfareism. The welfare is the ultimate objective or the final objective of every state. It may be possible that they may use different approaches. So now if we follow simply the Constitution of India. So the very first Constituent Assembly, if you know, first met on 11 December 1946. And that phase was quite significant in order to understand that India was slightly moving toward that phase which the India was looking for many years. That is the freedom, and you can say liberation. I will not say it freedom. I will say it by the name of liberation. There is a reason for that. Because even after 14th August 1947, India was under the straight colonial dominion status for several years till India declared itself as republic after introducing its constitution in written format, in written form, which has its own strength, and somewhere it was challenged, criticized, and questioned by many political experts and many political leaders of that time. You know, one thing which is very important to understand the constitution in a second manner, that when we read preamble, the very first thing which the members of Constituent Assembly, I will not say founding fathers of the Constituent Assembly, instead of that, I would love to call it founding members of the Constituent Assembly, because it is a matter of grave concern that why we are just calling it founding father, why we are not counting or simply acknowledging the significant contribution of the female contribution in the constitution, which is the founding mothers also. So instead of calling it just the founding father, we need to say it by the name of founding members of the constitution. So the founding members of the Constituent Assembly and this constitution, Indian constitution, they have decided to give certain things in form of liberty, equality, justice, and fraternity. Now the question is, which was raised by many persons, which was raised by many political leaders of that time during 1948, 49, 50, eventually 51 to be precise, before the RPA Act of 1951, that is the Representation of People Act 1951. The point is, what the Indian Constitution has in its through its provision, the Indianization value or indigenous values in it. So there are many questions, and simultaneously there are many sort of argument which actually supports the mandate that indeed Indian Constitution supports not only the borrowing or inspiration provision, rather it also has had the indigenous values. Let's not say the pictorial illustrations or the calligraphy by Nandalal Bose and his team. Let's stick to the ideas which is in the context form or in the textual form of, let's begin with the preamble. It focuses on the nature of equality, and it ensures that all individual unbiasedly, without any sense of fear and any kind of like bonding and other things that the constitution itself ensure, all the individuals about that they will all get equality. Now the question will arise, because we need to know the Indian Constitution and its prospect. We know that preamble since the beginning, 26 November 1949, it ensures that it gives all the individual equality. But if we are discussing the Indian Constitution on this date, 21st Feb of 2025, about the discourse and notion of equality, do you think that we are in position to claim or to be claim that thing that the Indian government of any stage or phase, or the Indian state to be precise, has already provided you the appropriate amount or the real meaning of equality? So can we say that the Indian state has provided us the equality? Is there anyone who can claim it among the participants? Hmm? Am I audible?
Sir.
Hello?
Sir,
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yes.
please. I just want to know, there is no harm because admit it. Like, if can we say that Indian state has provided us the discourse of equality?
Yes,
Yes. In what form?
Yes, sir.
in form of education, in form of election, or for selecting the governing government, for business, for every aspect.
See, you are saying in form of business, in form of education, in form of electoral. What
Yes,
shall be the real equality or the freedom in electoral representation? Merely having a vote, a right of casting your vote of your own likable or any like or dislike party or whatsoever it may be. That doesn't mean that you cut the freedom or you are equal in terms of representing your electoral rights. Let me just give you one instance. Sorry. Okay. See, let me just give you one point on this. When we are saying that Indian people, all the individual citizens of India, they have the right uh, to cast their vote to whom they want to cast their vote eventually. But the fact is, on what basis we are casting our votes? Are we all free while casting our vote, or something is there which is actually influencing or impacting our brain that you need to cast their vote to only this particular party or to this particular individual? Are we really casting our vote to the issues or the concern matters? Are we really casting our vote or choosing our electoral representative based on the issues or based on what the state is actually looking for? Or we are just simply casting our vote since the family is pressurizing, the elders are saying, the brothers and sisters, the friends are saying, or we have some inclination toward any political ideologies? So that means we are not free. We are merely liberate. We merely have a point of liberation. And that's what the point which I'm actually talking about.
no, sir, I differ from here, if you don't mind,
Yes,
sir.
please.
Yeah, actually, see, even if I see when, for example, I'm just taking an example, sir. Sorry if you allow, sir.
No. Please. You are allowed.
Sorry, my camera is not working, so I'm not able to on it.
Issue, okay? It's okay.
So, see, when we go and we are having the multiple option, we always try to, take opinion. For example, I want to buy laptop. Although it's not a government, it's not a laptop. I'm just taking the example of laptop.
Exactly.
So, when we go and we always try to know the features. Now, ultimately, we are the one who are going to vote. So if we
Yes.
take the opinion, it does not mean that we are liberal. It means that we are, for example, if I'm taking some opinion whether this is good, this candidate is good, or that candidate is good, and you tell something, that is not called liberal. So I think that is right now we are checking our option, which option is best, and then we are judgment. So I think we are I mean, that is, I think, according to me, is not liberal. That is actually we are having the equality, sir.
Exactly. You are right on that point. I'm not denying this fact. What I am saying is completely different. What I am saying,
liberty is that we have the liberty to go and cast our vote and whom we will vote.
exactly.
That will influence my own decision, my liking, my ideology,
That is
or my influence by another person.
that is a point of perception.
Once in a society.
That happens, that we all have the right to cast our vote, that when we are simply pressing the button on EVMs and other thing, that is my personal perception and my opinion. Now the question is not about that to whom we are casting our vote. The question is the reason or rationale behind it, right? The question is all about the rationale, whether we are focusing this opinion, we are making this opinion by our own, by using our own rationale, or someone is influencing us, because possibilities are there. Now the second possibility during this electoral representation is, indeed, possibilities are there. One individual may like a certain group, certain ideology, any political party, or
Sir, I
anything.
would like to. Hello. Sir,
Yes, please.
I would like to
May,
say
may, may
something,
I
sir.
know? May I know the name, please?
This is Pawan Kumar from Central University of Haryana.
Yes, please. Yes.
Center. Actually, sir, constitutionally, we are free to vote anyone. Influenced by something is a different thing. You buy, say for example, you want to buy shoes. Some companies, they give their advertisements through, through TV or some other social media. So you got influenced with that and you buy that one. There might be some other companies which do not advertise their products, so we won't buy that. Actually, it is less possibility that consumers buy their product. Okay, so influencing is something different, but constitutionally we are free, na? We can be influenced or we cannot be influenced, or it cannot be applied to all.
When you are
all
saying,
people.
sir,
One can be influenced.
Pawanji, let me just explain it to you. When you are saying that we have so many advertisement, we have so many choices, some may recommend us, some may give us their own opinion that we need to do that, we need
Yes,
to do
sir.
this in this
Yes, sir.
format. But ultimately, it is only we who have
Sir.
the power to decide,
Exactly.
right? Now, the
Absolutely
question is
right.
not about whether we are getting influenced or not. The question is all about that exactly we are going to cast our vote, right? But the thing is, what happened when you are saying that
Right.
advertisement are there are many sort of advertisements, say for shoes, cloth, car, anything else. But every time you need to check your taste and preferences, your utility consumption, right? And if someone, for an example, if someone suggests me and start
Similarly,
giving,
sir.
please.
Similarly, we can decide, we can choose a candidate to vote also, na?
Exactly, we can, but certainly while choosing any candidate or political party, that doesn't mean that you get influenced by anyone. It may be possible that you may heard many opinions. It may be possible that you will get many pros and cons of a single political party, a single political leader, but eventually the last order of the deciding that to whom you need to cast your vote shall be your own. There shall be no kind of opinion, there shall be no kind of influential policy.
Sir, actually, nobody can force someone to vote
I am
to
not
a
saying
particular
forcing. No, no,
candidate,
no, no,
na?
no. I am not forcing. I'm not using the word force in that. See, there is a point. There is a point. Who is the biggest culprit? The one who commit the suicide, or the second one who actually make the condition to make you suicide? I'm trying to make that thin line distinction, which need to understand by every voter, because possibilities are very much there. If you recall, let me just give you another instance. The second democratic upsurge of the 1995 onward, where the women's were not having that exact amount of representation in the electoral part, even that phase was highly challengeable, highly contested, where people were arguing while looking or simply forcing the state union government to have the women representation in political spheres. And when government decided, union government of India decided of the time, that there shall be 1/3 seat, or say for 33% for the women representation in the third democratic upsurge. That was the point which I am actually talking about. Even after the third democratic upsurge or some global institution pressures, say for the 1990s globalization, there was a situation in the rural and in some urban areas where women used to cast their votes, and it was eventually a statistical fact, where women used to cast their vote after getting these suggestions, strict suggestions, or simply certain limitations she faced, that you by their like spouse, by husband, or by their elders, that you need to cast the vote only to this political party. This was a historical fact by covering by many leading newspapers, many institutions while doing the surveys on electoral representation. That is the point which I am actually making. Second point, in terms of equality, when we read the word equality in Indian Constitution, there is a need to understand that equality is the only concern which every state has in its forefront. But certainly, for any state, it is very difficult to give you the equality. Why? That is the question. Because in theoretical format of the constitutional tradition, the real intent to give all the individual unbiasedly, that is equity. And equity is the only point or only discussion, only the real discourse that allow you to understand the equality. And sometime while giving the equality, the state needs to do certain inequalities. And that is the point of the fair treatment with all individuals, which we read even Indian Constitution, Article 14, equality before law, and this equality. Now, this point we need to understand. When we are considering in Constitution that fair treatment with all individuals, what this word fair treatment? Where there is a need to bring certain transformation in somebody's life to change from worst off to well off. And for that situation, to bring a serious transformation, state needs to do certain biasness, which in the US states or the American Constitution called it by the name of affirmative actions. But why this word affirmative action is in a great contestation or get misinterpreted in Indian context, because we have no idea and we have simply failed to simply classify the meaning of the affirmative action. We have no idea how to classify between equality and equity. Quite similar to the discourse of what we read in terms of liberty and freedom. Do you know the preamble of the Indian Constitution ensures you to give the liberty, not freedom? Why? Because the Constitution is in itself is a set of document that gives you the rational foundation of freedom, the rational bounded freedom. Because if it start giving you the absolute freedom, so that why there is a need to have the reasonable restriction in the Indian Constitution, especially every single fundamental right, there are many reasonable restrictions that we can't ignore about it. We can't ignore them. Why? To become or to simply put a reasonable restriction over all individuals so that they can't be uncontrolled or absolute. Because in democracy, absolutism has no significant place for any ideology, for any kind of individual perception, or any kind of practices. And if we are focusing on these things like the absolute thing, that why we are not absolute, why we don't have the freedom, why the liberty is there. If there is no liberty, instead of that, if we have only the freedom or absolute in absolute sense, there shall be a situation of the pre-condition of the state, where all individual will eventually follow the same process of what the European societies deliberately and proudly followed, that is the survival of the fittest. Now, what is the survival of the fittest? That is simply what the layman perspective is saying. The might is right concept. Those who have the possession, those who have the power, those who can influence and affect the society may have the opportunity to rule the society. So that is the first and foremost perception, not to give any individual the absolute freedom, rather giving them the liberty which comes in a very rational, bounded manner. That is the perception of giving you that thing. Now, if we simply focus on another part of this, justice. The Constitution talks about justice. The question is, the justice, when we heard the word justice, the very first thing comes in our mind is courts. Whether it is high court, whether it is like Supreme Court, whether it's lower court session, family court, and anything it could be. Now the question is, does the courts has the power to bring or to give you justice? The question is quite clear and very specific. Do you think that court have the power to give you justice? Anyone?
No, I think, sir.
Why? If there is no power, then
Because,
why do we have the courts?
no, sir, only based on the witnesses and the proofs only the decision will be given. In that, sometimes it might miss the justification given by the people in the court while they are discussing it, sir.
Okay, so merely based on the evidences, alibis, and the
Yes,
proofs and
sir.
evidences, and it can be biased, right? What exactly you
sir.
are saying?
Yes, sir.
So in that case, sorry, may I know the name who just
My
recently
name is
answered?
Padma from my name is Padma, sir, from English
Okay,
and Foreign Language University.
okay, thank you, ma'am. The point is, which I am actually saying, you are exactly picked the right thing. The point is, courts have no power to give us justice. What the court have is just to give judgments. It is upon the rationale of the individual to consider it whether it is justice or injustice. Exactly what you said. Because if we simply consider that court has the power to give us justice, then why there is a power to all the individual to approach to the next court to challenge the existing judgment, right?
Yes.
So that is
Yes, sir.
important in order to understand. Court cannot deliver or always fails to deliver you justice. It is always the rationale of all the individual, and that is why in fundamental duties, if you recall the fundamental duties, the constitution itself allows or simply say to all individual to enlighten their scientific temperament. Do you know what exactly the scientific temperament and how this scientific temperament has an overt relation, a direct or close relation with the sense of justice? It is merely because when you are simply making your decisions, simply participating in any state policies, by using the scientific temperament, and eventually this scientific word has no relation with all these chemicals like from the chemistry, physics, Ohm's law, biologist and other things. This scientific temperament means the ability to verify or to justify all the available statements, arguments. Nowadays, if you reckon the situation, nowadays what all the individuals say for above 18 and below 30 years of group of this age of group people, what they are doing, whenever they got the information through social media, say for the WhatsApp or any other social media platform, without verifying the authenticity, we simply start sharing that thing, whether it is a political opinion, whether it is just any other personal thing or simply other thing matters. We just start without thinking, without pondering over the authenticity and verifying the fact, we hastily sharing it with all. Why? Because of the non-scientific temperament we have. We all are saying proudly, we all are literate, we are educated. हम पढ़े लिखे लोग हैं, हम पढ़ रहे हैं, हम ग्रेजुएशन कर चुके हैं, हम पोस्ट ग्रेजुएशन कर रहे हैं, we are in that political post in government services and non-government services, but somehow there is no single person who can claim that they haven't done this thing throughout his life. कहीं ना कहीं किसी ना किसी मात्रा में किसी ना किसी पोजीशन पे हम सब ने इस इलिटरेसी को प्रमोट किया है कभी ना कभी. And we are simply cannot say that no, I am not involved in that. We simply cannot say, neither me nor any one of my participants. We cannot, because this is the reality, and we can't ignore this matter of fact that indeed somewhere we all participate in this kind of ignorant behavior, willingly or unwillingly. And that is the point when constitution in fundamental duties is actually focusing on increasing and enlightening the scientific temperament, that we need to focus on empirical investigation instead of relying over the normative judgments. These normative judgments are not bad. Do you know what is the founding unit the founding unit, or you can say the base of a science. What is the base of science? Can you tell me that? Is there anyone? What is the base of any scientific invention?
Hello,
Anji.
hello, sir. It's a problem. Whenever we face a problem, then only we will look for invention.
Okay, it's a problem.
Yeah.
What say if we don't have any problem? So that means we will not go for any sort of invention.
Sir, it can be a part.
Indeed,
Whenever we face a
the problem is the right thing. I'm not saying.
yeah,
I just
yeah.
want to know that. But in political science or in the constitutional manner, we generally don't consider the word problem because it is a very layman perspective. Even the science, what I actually want to explain you all, even in the science, the basic or the start of any scientific invention, it actually starts from an idea. An idea. An idea is a true reflection of the normative sense. That it could be possible, it could not be possible. That means it deals with the sense of probabilities. That is the important thing. संभावनाओं के साथ शुरू होने वाला जो आपका विचार आएगा, that is the important thing. और ये संभव है that you may get success on that idea and you may not get success on specifically that idea. But when you have the idea, any idea of inventing the bulbs, of inventing anything, electricity, this Ohm's law, and by focusing on anything else, when you have any idea which has the ability to change your life, you need to check the possibilities of the idea through empirical investigations. And that is which we call the hypothesis. Hypothesis 1, hypothesis 2, 3, and eventually then we move to the null hypothesis. Now, that is a different part of the research, but life is full of research. And that we need to understand during the process of empirical investigation. And when we simply come to the final conclusion, that which we call the concluding observation, that is the empirical outcome, which have come through, which has gone through lot of empirical investigation, lot of things which we negate. We simply vanish those thoughts and idea. We simply restart those things once again after getting failures. So that empirical investigation is very important. But nowadays, what people are doing, they got the idea, they took the inspiration, because there is no harm to take the inspiration from any source. But while taking any inspiration, while borrowing anything from anyone, you need to check it properly on empirical ground, whether this thing, this idea, this objective, this theory has the empiricity to get implemented in my condition, in my circumstances or not. Merely imitating someone's thought, someone's idea, someone's theory is not helpful. And that is why in comparison, in comparative politics and in comparison, there is no harm to say that comparison is good, but copied is bad. What we heard since our childhood, that don't compare yourself. The political science or the constitutional structure actually negate this statement and allows you to do that comparison. Why? But what sort of comparison? A comparison which is purely based on your own rationale. If you stop doing your comparison with the other or with the same level or with the same ability or skills, you won't be able to know how will you get your own growth. Because the growth is the only thing which we need or which we actually map with the individual perspective, because the development in a whole always comes in a holistic manner. So comparison of anything is not bad, but comparison is bad when you are simply copying all the things without value evaluating, without analyzing, and without doing any kind of empirical investigation of the existing theories. Now, the second point, the next point in the introduction of the Constitution. How many of us exactly know what exactly is the idea of this reservation? The reservation is a very important and I believe very contested issue even in the 2025. How we can simply understand the reservation and how is it possible for all of us to make all understand that this reservation is not exactly the same what nowadays we are experiencing from our political leadership. How we can difference between that reservation? Is there anyone who can say that? Anyone? How can you differentiate with the idea of reservation, which is completely different from the practice of reservation, which we have in nowadays in the contemporary or the present context? On what basis we can differentiate it? Is it possible? First of all, is it possible to differentiate it?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes. It's possible. That's great. That's great. And on what basis we are saying that it is possible?
Sir, I think it is depending on the education or the family financial status. First, basic.
Education, finance, status. Okay. And anyone else?
The main concept of the main concept of reservation was to uplift the neglected categories.
Okay, that's good. But how will you differentiate the idea of reservation with the today's idea of reservation, which we are actually experiencing? That question is for all. Okay, don't worry. We'll discuss it in a very brief and not in brief, but try to explain it or to understand in a detailed manner. No worries. Do you know that why state introduced the idea of reservation?
Sir, the state had an idea that by granting reservation, the neglected categories will get those opportunities which are upper categories availing.
Okay.
To
Anyone
make,
else? Yes, please.
make it to the level of equality. Somewhat, what could they have done?
So that point is like to give the all equal opportunity, right?
Yes, yes, sir.
So can you say that the state has delivered or what the state actually promised? So state gets succeed in that?
Sir, recently in year 2021, the Supreme Court of India had asked the government to calculate the representation of minors in public sector. How much they are representing in public sector? Just only to understand whether reservation is required or not.
Okay, whether
Whether
reservation is
the
required.
the concept, basic concept of constitution has been reached or not.
Okay. See, the word which I picked from your explanation, equal opportunity to give all, right? The very first
Yes, sir.
statement, right? Equal opportunity. Sir, what if I say, or I simply negate that word, equal opportunity? I had a great professional disagreement with the word equal opportunity. State, although textualize the word equal opportunity, but the fact is, state always practice fair opportunity. That we need to understand.
Yes.
Fair opportunity. I just explained it the word fair opportunity because if state will follow the equal opportunity, state will never do any kind of those project, those policies. They are simply helpless to create all the policies which has the ability or tendencies to provide the equality or opportunity to all.
Yes.
State rather in practice, I'm saying, and I'm focusing on that word. In practice, state focuses on those words, which means the fair opportunities.
Yes,
Why
sir.
fair opportunities? Let me just tell you, without going into the philosophical in depth or philosophical underpinnings of the John Rawls ideas or Amartya Sen and the other principle, I'm not exactly going by that. That will give us a lot of philosophical contestation. Let's stick to the arguments, let's stick to the reality. If a state fails to follow the fair equality or the fair opportunity, how state can provide the opportunities, let's not say equal, but the opportunities to all individual, where there are many section, many certain many groups who are not even getting the right opportunity to be called themselves equal. And it shall be the duty, I'm saying that, and I mean it, it shall be the imperative duty to give everyone fair opportunity to prove that they can also contribute in the state's welfare. Because everywhere, state needs a participation, state needs a representation. And if a state is not giving you the fair opportunity, then how is it possible to give that? See, for an example, let me just give you an example. If we have, or if we simply follow the Marxian way of identifying what state is, although Marx and Marxian perception do not firmly believe in that, that state has the ability to do that, because what they strongly believe, the state is always act as that institution or phenomena which will always help the bourgeois or the capitalist or the liberalist. And I am not negating their theories or their beliefs and other things. Now, the point which I want to explain in this context, in this political system context, is where we need to understand one thing very specifically. What if state is not doing any kind of biasness? That biasness is not negative, although. Why? Because to bring a serious transformation in anybody's life who are always is like in deterioration or completely in a stage which is completely neglected by many years or by many things, the point is, how will you bring a serious, a positive transformation to their life if state is not able to give them the opportunity to be called in a participating manner of the state projects and policies? How? So for that, state has the right to do that certain form of, which allegedly we are calling it by the name of discrimination. Some sort of discrimination are state-based discrimination, state-sponsored discrimination, and that state-sponsored discriminations are not eventually all bad and worst, but only in that condition where state are projecting or practicing that discrimination with the positive mindset that state will allow all the individual to participate in equal, if not equal, but in fair, with fair opportunity. That is most important thing. And if we are not able to understand that matter of fact, and what we have seen, because of only this misinterpretation we have in our mind, there are many people who are saying that reservation is the root cause behind all of inequalities we practice, we believe, and we have seen in the society. This is the only reason that why we are criticizing that thing. And sometimes we are simply saying that it should be based on economic, it should be based on social status, it should be based on something else. Now the point is quite clear. Will you be able to claim or simply give us a blueprint that on which point you need to put a restriction over that? And if there is a point of restriction, then how will you simply explain that from which point state need to rectify all the policies? So for that, state needs to understand, state through the constitution explains every single thing from the fundamental rights. Say for, you all have covered that thing, the Article 16, equality of opportunity. And inside of Article 16, equality of opportunity, we all have witnessed or seen the Article 16, Clause 4, the equality of opportunity in promotions, specifically in Indira Sani case versus Union of India. We all have experienced that thing. So if there is no affirmative action, an affirmative action which sometimes we experience in a negative connotation, but eventually state is bound to do that, to give equality, to give fair opportunity, to be precise, to all the individuals. That we need to understand, simply to raise or to enlighten the scientific temperament in all individual mindset while dealing with the constitution, while explaining or while understanding the constitution. And certainly if we have the ability to understand it through these perspective, only from that point we can say that yes, we are actually following the constitution. Prior to that, we are simply the believers of constitution, but not the real practitioner of the constitution provision. It is continuing in the mode or? Okay, it's okay. So, have you ever heard the constitution word, and if you just focus from which point, from the point which I begin my lecture, that I was not saying the founding fathers, rather I stick to the word founding members of the Indian Constitution. And that is very interesting topic, where that is very interesting point to understand. As you know that there are so many political texts and political references in many competitive exams, since you all have gone through it, where we just focus on the word founding fathers of the Indian Constitution, which we have started from Ambedkar, Vallabhbhai Patel, Jagjeevan Ram, Rajendra, and Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, and many others. But we simply, although it's unintentional, but we simply ignore the significant contribution by the women's, which many people used to call it by the founding mothers of the Constituent Assembly. But let's not, the point is not to create or to simply ignite the feminist discourse or to simply shift the constitutional discourse from the through a feminist or non-feminist group. The point is, how is it possible, or is it possible for all of us to read or to evaluate or to see the constitution from the feminist lens? And why it is important to see the feminist lens in this perspective? That is the most important thing which we need to understand. Although there are many people, there are many political experts also, the many leading political or constitutional expert who I am quite it is quite unfortunate to say that thing, but many people used to ignore this matter of fact that where they are not giving equal opportunity or say for the fair opportunity to all those women who had made a significant provisions, who had significant contribution in the making of constitution. Do you know the word founding father? This word founding father, exactly whose creation is this? Is it the Indian word founding father, or that to stick only to the male's contribution of the constitution? Is it the Indian connotation or Indian, you can say the value, indigenous value? Anyone?
Don't know, sir.
Okay, no issues. Let me just give you a reference of this word founding father and why the political authors, why the political historians and the other scientists, political scientists, they used to focus on this word, because the provision or the mindset of borrowing or taking inspiration of certain ideas. If you just focused on that word, when I said the comparison is not bad, or if you are comparing your values with someone else's existing values, it will give you an idea that from which point, on which specific point you are lacking. and what exactly you need to do to overcome from this situation, right? Now the point is, this word of founding father, which all the historians, it is not the constitutional thing which we borrowed. It is not the founding members of the Constituent Assembly who pressurize everyone to follow this founding father word, quote unquote. Rather, it is a historian's writing style or the writer's writing style or perception, where they borrowed this word from the US, United States of America's writing pattern. If you focused on this US pattern of mentioning or acknowledging the significant contribution of their own members, they stick only to the word founding fathers. And it was a philosopher, it was a political scientist of the US, Alex de Tocqueville, who stick not exactly about the word founding father, but his inclination is always toward to acknowledge the founding father word while explaining, while simply elaborating the contribution or simply describing the contribution in the process of the constitution making. That was the important point which they need to understand. From that perspective, the historians used to count that word, and they have borrowed that perception of introducing the founding father, where unfortunately for the Indian context, where we simply forget the word, that there are many women's, some feminine powers were there in the Constituent Assembly who made a significant provision, significant contribution, simultaneously working with all the male, all the masculine power in the Constituent Assembly, with Ambedkar, with Nehru, with Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, and with all Jagjeevan Ram and other one, Vallabhbhai Patel. Some women's name was like Kamla Chaudhary, Suchita Kriplani, we have Durga Bhai, Purnia Banerjee, Renuka Ray, Hansa Mehta, Swaminathan from the southern part. So there are so many women who made a significant provisions. And I believe in the next session, we all will slightly cover these things in great detail, and rest we will cover all the other points which are most important and imperative to be to discuss here in this perspective, while introducing the significant provision of the Indian Constitution and how there is a need to understand the Constitution not just from the believer's perspective, rather to understand the Constitution from a practitioner's perspective. That we will try to cover in the next session or in the upcoming session. Thank you all for that, and let's meet in the next session.
Thank you, sir.
And now we will take the break for the 15 minutes. Then we will resume our session at 3:30. Welcome back, participants. We are audible.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir, audible.
We are going to resume the session now.
Okay, sir.
Okay, welcome back everyone. So in the previous session, we have just touched a significant part, which is very important to understand the constitutional provisions and constitution. And let's exactly begin from that point, but to make a significant understanding of that point where there is a need to understand that there was an equal and fair contribution of all, including the masculine and the feminine parts, in the making of the constitution. But before that, I need you to take from this point to a significant part. As we all know, there is a point, there is a discussion which is like in trend across the universities. Even Ministry of Education is and UGC is actually focusing or stressing upon its importance. That is the Indian Knowledge System, IKS. And you all have heard this name in different symposiums, seminars, conferences, fellowship, projects, and so on. But before there is a need to understand what exactly Indian knowledge system, my point and concern is not to discuss exactly about what Indian knowledge system is, what Bharatiya Gyan Parampara is. My point is to discuss that without decolonizing your mind, it is not possible, it is not feasible idea or thought to understand the knowledge tradition. I will not say system because that is not a right word to understand. System has its own limitation. System has its own restrictions, sometime institutional, sometime beyond institutional. Let's stick to the word tradition. But for that, we need to understand what exactly and why it is important to understand the word decolonization and how this word decolonization is related with today's discussion on introducing the constitution in this context, like Indian context, Indian perspective. You know, one thing which is very important. The first thing is, I just said, what is the relation between decolonization and the Indian constitution? It is a direct relation. If you simply focus the part of or the phases of 1947 onwards, that was considered in international politics as the phase of decolonization, which actually starts from 1945 onwards till 1949. And that phase is undoubtedly categorized and classified as the process of decolonization, or eventually from the international political term, it is the process of rising of third world. But in Indian context, it is quite hasten in nature to call that India get decolonized. It is quite unfortunate. It is quite sarcastic in this context. We, even in 2025, we simply cannot claim that we are fully out of the colonial mindset. I am not taking this discussion in those parts, in those theories, in those actions where people are looking to change the institutional corridors, to change the institutional names and other things. I'm not focusing on that. That may have their possibilities, that may have the tendencies to decolonize, or that may not have the tendencies or other things. But that is not our part of discussion. What we need to discuss it, what we need to understand it, that how this decolonized perception or how to raise the Swaraj concept in Indian mind. And mind you, that Swaraj is not exactly what Gandhian perception talks about. My concept or what I am trying to explain you from the word Swaraj is all about that where there shall be a self-rule which comes after a self-evaluating process and or a system that will help you to understand what you need and what you don't need. And that is why the constitution will give you an idea to bifurcate or to understand the thin line distinction between morality and ethics. Now, people may get confused that what exactly is this morality and why I am saying that morality and ethics are different. Theoretically, both are same. Or if you simply check the vocab in dictionary and other things, both are same in that perspective. But while practicing, they all different. Morality will give you the normative values. What I just explained in the previous session, that morality will give you the idea of practicing the normative values, where you are practicing and repeatedly looking for the change from the someone else perspective, not from the inner conscience. Rather, ethics will learn you or simply help you in order to learn or understand how there is a need to put a reasonable restriction or limit of every theories. We always practice in morality toleration, the idea of toleration. But this idea or the concept of ethics actually talks about even the limits of toleration. Even the toleration has its own limit. And that perspective, which we all gain, not just from the Adi Kavyas of the Indian knowledge tradition, that is Mahabharata, say for, but even your own constitutional values supports the idea of the limits of toleration. If you focus on the word of reasonable restriction, why there is a word reasonable restriction, by that we need to understand. In a previous session, we had an answer of right to move here and there, right to profess and practice everything. Now the question is very clear. We have right to profess, practice and belief of everything. But can we practice those things which may harm someone else's belief, someone else's faith, someone else's perception? Indeed, the question is very clear. If we focus the Indian knowledge tradition, the Indian tradition never allows any individual to simply criticize or to simply say that your theory, your belief, your faith has no worth, has no values. We simply do not believe in that perception where we simply counter every theory of any one perception. We can counter it, we can negate, but we simply cannot say that thing, you are absolutely wrong. Because in Indian tradition, we generally, what we believe, that no one is absolute right and no one is absolutely wrong. Because in Indian tradition, since long, there is no place, no significant place for the word absolutism. And that is the perception which we have seen in Indian constitution. And perhaps this way of decolonizing the values, decolonizing the perception or thinking order is very important, because from this perspective, if you focused in the previous session, I recommend you, or I just take a name of Alex de Tocqueville, who was a leading person, a philosopher or a political scientist of the United States of America, who focused on the discussion of the constitutional provision, the fundamental right provision of the US Constitution, and he indirectly supports the idea of discussing all the significant contribution of the male. Certainly, it was possible that US may not have an appropriate share of the feminine contribution, but we simply cannot borrow that idea or perception in Indian context. And for that perception, we need to overcome, we need to come outside from that Eurocentrism, that Eurocentric thought. If there is a need, or if there is an imperative call to understand what constitution is, how constitution can help the individual in Indian state, so there is need to interpret, there is a need to understand, there is a need to practice the constitution beyond Eurocentric approaches. That is the most important thing. But unfortunately, from 1950 onwards till 2025, on this date, on this hour, we are not discussing the constitution from the Eurocentric approach. We are saying it Indian constitution. But while following and by focusing on these things, we are not practicing that thing. We are just simply following those tradition. We are simply following that provision even in the constitution. You know what the founding provision of what is the founding provision of the Indian constitution? Is there any idea? Is there any participant who can help us to know that what is the founding provision of the Indian constitution which is still in practices and which could be considered as a root cause behind the contestation and tussle between the union and state? Is there anyone who can? Okay, no issues. That is the provision, significant provisions of the two colonial acts, that is the Government of India Act 1919 and the Government of India 1935 Act, which act as the foundational values of today's federal structure. And still, the serious tussle between the union and state, where those foreign experts or the Western European expert, they used to count India as quasi-federal instead of calling it as a federal structure or federalism. Now the point is to discuss why India is not federal. You know, one thing which is very important to understand, we all have heard this narrative. I will not say theory, I will not say statement, I will not say discourse. I stick to the point narrative since our school days or education, that India is the largest democratic state in the world, right? Largest. And United States of America is the oldest democratic state. But what if we can simply challenge, or do we have the ability to contest that point that India is not just the largest, rather India is the ancient democratic state in the world? Can we say that? Participants?
Yes, sir.
I request you to please open your camera so that we can see. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the question is quite clear. You all have heard the question?
Yes,
Can
sir.
we
We
say
can call India as a. Yes, sir.
How?
In ancient time, the Raja Maharajas were also elected, not elected, but selected by the community.
Can you just give me an example of that where the ruler was elected by a community?
सर एक तो राजा अशोक.
अच्छा, Ashok was selected by whom? Which
It was
community? Which community select Ashok?
whole community followed that leader. He was the leader basically. अगर प्रजा उसको सपोर्ट नहीं करती तो वो राजा नहीं बन सकता था.
ओके. प्रजा अगर उसे सपोर्ट नहीं करती तो वो राजा नहीं बन सकता था. ओके. कहां पर है ये टेक्स्ट का रेफरेंस?
सर राजा नंद को इन्होंने अशोक ने हराया था. ठीक है.
राजा नंद को.
धनानंद.
धनानंद को लेट मी जस्ट करेक्ट दिस हिस्टोरिकल फैक्ट. धनानंद को चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य ने हराया था, अशोक ने नहीं.
सही कह रहे सर.
हाँ, if I am not although I am not a history professor, but political history इतना पढ़ा है. हाँ.
लेकिन अगर सर चाणक्य की सपोर्ट से अशोका ने उनको हराया, अगर उस टाइम जो प्रजा थी उनके अगेंस्ट रिवोल्ट कर देती तो क्या राजा बन सकते थे? नहीं बन सकते थे.
मैं आपको दो एग्जांपल्स इसी के बेस पे देता हूँ. जैसे आपने अशोक और चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य का एग्जांपल दिया, मैं आपको दोनों का देता हूँ. चंद्रगुप्त मौर्य के टाइम पे जो आपने रेफरेंस की बात कही है, उसमें अगर आप देखेंगे तो मौर्य वंश से पहले जो नंद वंश चला है, नंद वंश की जो राजनीतिक गतिविधियां रही हैं वह जनता के लिए कल्याणकारी नहीं रही।
हाँ जी।
हालांकि नंद वंश के जो राजा थे धनानंद, जो अंतिम माने गए हैं, उनकी सारी नीतियां जो थी उनके भोग विलास से लिप्त रही हैं, और उन्हीं के वंशजों के लिए, उन्हीं के परिवार के लिए, जिसे हम राज परिवार कह रहे हैं, ऑल द रॉयल फैमिलीज, इट कवर्स ओनली दोज पीपल, एंड ऑल द फ्यूडल लॉर्ड्स, इट सपोर्ट ऑल द फ्यूडल लॉर्ड जो सामंतवादी रहे, सामंत रहे हैं, उनको मदद करती रही है। व्हेन कौटिल्य, according to the history, when Kautilya plans or proposed the idea to change or uproot the Nand dynasty, because of this fact, Maurya was not getting the full support of the people. It was a revolt. It was a revolt who get later became a revolution, right? It was a planned idea. And someone's mic is on. Please just turn it off. Okay, okay. So now let's come to the second example of Ashok. When Ashok had a fight with the people, he got the consensus by the people, not willingly, but by his force. So that was not the perception. But the point is, the question which was specifically that how we can say that the Indian political system was highly democratic even from the ancient root. Because the question is, which we accept as our Indian fate, what the Western or European thinkers have imposed in our mind, that India is merely the largest one, largest democracy. And for that, they used to make fun of or make a political, you can say, satire on our thoughts and perception that mango people, banana republic. These kind of things we have heard a lot of time. So for that perception, I considered it not as a theory, not as a science, not as a discourse, rather simply as a narrative. But let me just give you an idea. Let me just give you a thought or with a historical sense. India was highly democratic. If you recall the Mahabharat phase, you all have read Mahabharat, or at least you all have heard what Mahabharat is, if I am not wrong, right? Yes? If I am not wrong, please repeat. Yes,
Yes,
Mahabharat
sir.
आपके बारे में आप लोगों ने सुना है, right? And
Yes,
you
sir.
all are familiar by the name of King Shantanu, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then all these things, when Bhishma was not made as the leader or the next successor of the throne, you know what was the communities, what the word you said, communities, you know what was the reflection or the resentment the king received while not making the Bhishma or Devvrat as the next successor. They have challenged the king that who has authorized you to make that decision, because you are merely the representation of the divine rights. So you don't have the power to take that decision that who will be your next successor, and especially in that case where the next successor is not born, that is the Satyavati's unborn child, right? That was the part of democracy, where the community, where the nobles, where the councils have the right to challenge it. That who authorized you when you are merely the representation of the divine rights? Because king is not sovereign in Indian context. What the king, where the king is sovereign and supreme in the Western context. And let's make a comparative study on that. Just compare your own Indian constitution with the UK's or the Great Britain constitution, Britain's constitution. They also have a constitution, but in unwritten format, but they have claimed that they are constitutional monarchy. And we are simply democratic, we have a democratic constitution. So here, it is not possible that we can say that, or we stick to the idea that India is not an ancient one. Let me just give you another example for that. You all have heard a word temple, right? And what is the perception in our mind regarding the word in this context, temple? That it is an institution only for the place of worship. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it is merely an institution for the worship practices or following the worshipping practices. And it could be like worship practice could be like different as per the beliefs. What if I simply change the meaning with facts that this temple, which is in a form of institutional, is not just exactly for the worshipping practices? Because the Indian tradition, what I just said, Indian knowledge tradition, the worship practice has no limitation. And that is the belief, that is the point where you can get from the different school of thought, where believers and non-believers, as per the theist and atheist, and as per the Astic and the Nastic group of thought, they have the equal representation in Indian tradition, or in equal representation in Indian knowledge system, in knowledge tradition, where there was an equal representation, there was an equal consideration to the believers Astika, to non-believers Nastic, to the Lokayat principle, to the Brahminic school of principle, to the syncretic school of thought, to the Shramnik school of thought, where there is no barrier of the worshipping practices, because we generally do not rely over a institution boundaries or territories for worshipping practices. So now what is that for? What is that institution for all about? The temples. The temples in the hierarchical order of the administration lineup from the top to the bottom, and eventually simultaneously from the bottom to the top, the temple act as the lowest or the smallest unit of the administrative decentralizing powers. If the king is the highest one as per the monarchical tradition. Nowadays, what is the tradition of the modern political system? What we consider as per the 73rd Amendment Act and as per the 74th Amendment Act, we used to consider panchayat as the smallest unit of this democratic decentralization. But let me just correct from the ancient perspective. Even from the panchayat, the lowest one is the temple, because since the Vedic ages, India is highly spiritual state. But what is the narrative? India is a religious body. India is a religious state. That the narrative which we heard, which we learned since the school days, school education, in colleges and other, in many significant texts. India was never ever a religious state. India since long and a strong practitioner of spirituality, and because of that, we respect every faith, every belief. And there was no differences, there was no plan and thought of proving who is superior, who is sovereign in terms of faith and belief. That is the point. Because if you stick to that idea that my belief is supreme and someone else's belief is not supreme or superior, that will give you an idea of contestation in order to prove who is supreme, who is sovereign. And India don't allow you to think that. This Indian values, this Indianization value never accept this kind of contestation. You know what? There is a German proverb that there are 13 ways to see a black bird. And quite similar to that, there is a Vedic perception that ekam sat vipra bahuda vadanti. The truth is one, but learned person call it by different names. So how can you say that just your perception is the right one and someone else's perception is completely false? So that is a narrative to make you entangle in an unended tussle, that where you will just involved in those businesses to prove who is superior, who is not. And that was the perception where the constitutional provision was just stick and to just focused on the masculine contribution without focusing, without giving the respect to the feminine concept that the female, the constitution, or later on, those historians once again start a discussion of male superiority versus the female ones with the idea that why there is no word, why someone else is not focusing on those things, that founding father, if there is a word in the constitution, or while discussing the constitution, then why there is no word to discuss the founding mothers of the constitution? My question is quite clear in this context. Why focusing on the word fathers and mother? Instead of that, we can stick to the idea of members of the members who contributed significant provisions in the process of making constitution that has the ability to enlighten, to empower, or to ensure that all individual will be treated unbiasedly and with fair opportunities. Let me just discuss another point, which is very important to know the Indian Constitution, that after 1948, there was a great discussion that what significant provision does Indian Constitution have, which give us the idea that this Indian Constitution is not just a bulky constitution or a set of all documents that may claim that this constitution will help you to understand the rule of law, the rules and regulation, law and order, harmony, peace, fraternity, liberty, and all significant provisions. The point is how we can say that this constitution in itself is suffice to prove that constitution has focusing on the indigenous Indian values, or does this constitution really have any Indian values in it through its significant provision? So yes, indeed, to some extent, this constitution covers the Indian values. And specifically, let me just tell you that borrowing some provision, taking some inspiration from someone else's theory or some existing value does not mean that your theory is completely biased, completely like copied one another thing. Because if you know, and let me just quote you the very famous but controversial historical writer who was like criticized by many for introducing and for writing our national song, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. Bankim Chandra Chatterjee himself agreed on that point and himself quoted that thing, that there shall be no harm to take an inspiration from anyone if that inspiration has an ability to give you progressive values and give you those things which you are looking for. And in this context, the Indians are looking in 1947 some sort of strengthened powers to contest against the colonial thing. And let me just quote you another point from the Gita Upadesh, where Krishna, while preaching Arjun about the things that if the battlefield is not yours, then the weapon or the arms shall not be yours. अगर आप किसी युद्ध में, किसी युद्ध क्षेत्र में हैं और उसकी परिस्थिति आपके अनुसार नहीं है, तो उस युद्ध में लड़ने की जो भी आपकी रणनीति होगी वे भी आपके अनुसार नहीं होनी चाहिए. There shall be no morality, rather there shall be some point of ethics that will change your strategy to contest, to fight against your enemy, the political one or any other enemy. You need to change your strategy immediately if the battlefield or the circumstances is not as per your condition or say for favorable condition. That you need to change on immediate point. And if you fail to do so, then we have heard so many narratives from the history at the point where many narratives were there on like historical outlines where people, because of their adamant philosophy, because of their nature, that we will not do this kind of unethical things in wars, and they simply sacrifice their life against their enemy, right from Prithviraj Chauhan to many other rulers who fought bravely, undoubtedly, against the Mughals, against the Britishers, but without changing their policies, strategic thought, they sacrifice their life. But that is from the moralical perspective, morality, not ethics. because what they said that we simply cannot raise our arms and weapons against the weakest enemy or anyone who were not in that situation to fight or to continue the fight. But what the ethics, what the practical ethics talks about, that if you have the idea, if you have the power to rule, if you have the power to do that, you can kill it, you can simply vanish that thing, uproot that thing without wasting any thought. Take an example of that Mahabharat war where Krishna simply prescribed or ordered, let me just correct it, ordered Arjun to kill Karn. If he missed that opportunity, he will not be able to fight or to defeat Karn throughout his life. That is the perception where we need to understand it. You need to change your policy, and imitating any provision will not is simply not allow you to prove that you are simply copying everything. It doesn't mean that you are copying everything or you have no idea what indigenous value is. And even for that understanding, where people are saying that constitution has no indigenous value, no Indianness. So let me just tell you that if you see the real constitution or their provision, if you read the part, there are so many Indianization values, so many indigenous values in every beginning of every chapter. In the beginning of every chapter where the Indianization value was inscribed, calligraphed, and the illustration pictures are suffice to explain that the constitution makers were so interested in order to fulfill all those conditions, all those things which may have the possibilities that if they didn't follow those conditions, if they didn't follow that thing, possibilities are there that they will face a lot of criticism. And eventually for that, they have covered every single thing, every minute details they have covered in that things. Now the reason and the rationale behind these things. There are many kind of arguments and contestation between different perception, different beliefs. And what kind of contestation these are? That the Constitution of India, it focused only from this perspective, from this ideology. So let me just tell you, if you focus the preamble itself focused on the possible theories, the possible ideologies of every school of thought. It has the Republican idea, it has the liberal traditions, it has the conservative ideas, it has the Gandhian philosophy, it has the scientific temperament of the empirical investigation of the critical school of thought. So everything is there. And these all theories was presented in the Indian values since long, since the Vedic ages. We never allowed anyone to do that. We always stick to those parts where all the individuals have the equal rights to claim, to profess, to practice, and further to give their views unbiasedly and fearlessly. यही चीज हमें समझनी है कि भारतीय संविधान की जो मूल्य और जो मुख्य धारा है उसमें सभी वैचारिक पद्धतियों को, सभी वैचारिक मानसिकताओं को और जो भी हमारे समाज में मंतव्य रहे हैं उन सभी को बराबर स्थान दिया गया है। और यह आपको संविधान की उद्देशिका से आपको एकदम सटीक मात्रा में इस चीज की अनुभूति होगी, आप इस चीज को समझेंगे तभी जब आप संविधान को बगैर किसी पूर्वानुमान और किसी पूर्वाग्रह के देखेंगे। अमूमन हम क्या करते हैं, what we generally did, when we read the constitution, we come up with a pre-assumption mind that either, first point, either we need to support the constitution, or second, we need to critique the constitution. We need to critique the constitutional provision, or if not critique, we need to challenge it to prove the intellect quotient of R in front of all, to get the scientific temperament or the social status in front of all. Yes, we can make theories. We used our brain, we used our intellect quotient, we use our rational, we all are educated and literate, but while making continuous criticism, sometime in the name of absolute criticism, sometime in the name of constructive criticism, doesn't mean that you have the intellect power to understand any theory. And in this case, constitution. First, there is a need to understand unbiasedly. First, there is a need to cover constitution or any theory objectively. Why? Because constitution consider you the same and treat you with a same lens. But that same lens doesn't mean that you all are equal. No, you all are not equal. As per the Western theory of the equality, there are two forms of inequality as well. One is the natural one, another one is the man-made inequality. So we all are simply helpless in front of the natural one. But in terms of the man-made inequality, it is only we who are actually responsible one for the creation of the man-made inequalities. So it shall be our perception only to remove all those things from our mind that will simply remove all the things that we are unequals. We all are equals. But the thing is, we need to increase the ability, we need to increase or enhance the ability to understand it, that on what grounds and from which pattern, which provision, we can simply take this thing on a par. That is the important thing. Secondly, let's again come to that point which we left, that the democratic features. When the Western theorists, they used to say that India is the largest democracy of the world. And India has a quasi-federal structure, not a federal one. And what they have suggested in order to justify their demands, that Indian constitution empowered or strengthened the union in terms of the state while giving some majority strength in the concurrent list. The three significant lists in the distribution of power between the union and state. So what they had suggested, that in the concurrent list, the state is not that much empowered or strong as comparatively to the union, where union have the ability, union have the power to rule or to make provision even in the parts of the concurrent list or the subjects which comes under the concurrent list. That is the point which we need to understand it, right? So if that was their idea of proving the fact or proving the things that India was not, or India is not a federal state, so for that perception, there is a need to understand. While giving the autonomous power or full power, what they had suggested to the state, will that make India a federal structure? So if we focus on the ancient part of the political system, all the political system in this context in India was highly federal in nature, where all the provinces, they have their own set of rules, they have their own political symbols, they have their own political flags, representation, and they eventually focused all the things, but without overcoming from that situation that they all are responsible toward one union or one largest king, or you can say Chakravarti Samrat, jisko ancient term mein we have heard that thing. So all the provinces have their own things, have own representation, have their own notion of giving the citizenship rights, all the trade rights, all the trade laws, but eventually in the end they focused only and they worked under the regime, under the shadow of a one single king, single emperor. And that reason I believe is suffice to negate the idea that India's democracy is not just the largest, rather it was the ancient. And if you focused in the previous discussion where I was explaining the part that the temple is not just about the worshipping practices, and I have proved it that the temple was the smallest unit of this hierarchical order in the administrative outline, even beyond panchayat system or the gram sansad. And the chronology was like that. The top of the administration was undoubtedly the king or the emperor. The second one is the council. Third one is the cabinet. And the fourth one is the Nobel laureates or the unbiased wise men of the people of the society, not just men. Then Sabha and Samiti was there. And then all form of the Panchayat and Gram Sansad, and later on the temple. And all people of the villages and the other perception, all the individual, first they meet and they visit to the temple, not just because they have the great belief over the God or the Almighty or for the faith or in spirituality. Rather, they know that the king had already distributed certain amount, which nowadays we are also considering in form of consolidated funds, which union used to distribute to the states, consolidated fund for their petty expenses or for the state budget. So the same thing was followed in the ancient part, where the king already distributed certain amount in and place and keep all those amount in temples. And that is the reason nowadays we have seen that many temple had their own treasures. It is not just because of the treasure of some philanthropist and some other, like someone has donated to the temple because of spirituality and because of their faith. Even the king has deposited or simply distributed the fund, some treasures in form of consolidated fund in temples for the petty expenses or day-to-day expenses of the villages of the kingdom and the ground level. And that is the only reason why in the history we have seen many conquerors or invaders first try to manipulate or invade the temples, not just because of the spirituality, but because of this fact also, because they know that Indian political system was highly democratic and they have keep a great treasure in temples for the people expenses and their demands. Certainly it is very difficult to fulfill all the supplies because what we have read, what we have seen in many daily soap serials, what we have heard from many narrative, that a common individual simply move to the king in his court and seeking for justice. It is completely abstract knowledge. It is completely false. I will not say partial truth, because certainly it is very difficult to approach, not just in ancient time, rather in the modern present time, to directly approach to the head of the state. Is it possible for you to directly approach the head of the state, that is the president, in terms of the first citizen? Is it possible for us? Eventually the answer will be no from all the participants.
No, sir.
Yes, it is not possible for all of us. Even it is not possible for all of us to approach even a councillor of our state, even a legislative assembly member, even a member of parliament. Not for all. It could be possible for some people, those who have some family relation, some good relation like neighborhood relation, but genuinely not for all. So how is it possible in ancient time for all the common people directly to approach to the king? What we have seen in the movies, in daily soap serials, what we have through the historical narrative, कि एक व्यक्ति को परेशानी हुई, वो directly राजा के पास पहुंच गया. Because there are full of narratives from Raja Harishchandra to Vikramaditya to everyone like Akbar. अकबर की सभा बैठ रही है तो हाँ एग्जैक्टली कि अकबर की सभा बैठ रही है और अकबर कह रहा है कि आओ राज दरबार लगा है. It is not generally possible for that. Even in the medieval time, comparatively to the ancient, when we have Sabha and Samiti, the medieval time focused on Diwane Aam and Diwane Khas. So Diwane Aam was the pattern where the common individual had a representation, but not even in covert or in direct representational. Even in that format, they went to the local unit, sometimes temple and sometimes the madrasas. And their people, those people who represent the common people, they used to take their voices in the Diwane Aam or Diwane Khas in the medieval time, in the Sabha and Samiti in the ancient time, and nowadays in the lower house and the upper house in the modern parliament system, which we call Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha, which we call the bicameral legislature, right? ये उस फॉर्मेट की बात हो रही है, and because of that fact, India is highly democratic. India is highly democratic, not just in form or not just in fact of proving or formulating the policy, but India was highly democratic, even focusing on distributions of powers, autonomy. India has distributed everything, but if you focused on the US said 50 federating units in terms of like proving the federal principle, indeed they have everything, rights, duties, principles and everything. But comparatively to ancient Indian democratic system, they are all federating provinces, all provinces, princely provinces, they all were liable or responsible or they are accountable toward one entity, that is the largest single emperor. It gets changed with the time. It gets changed when they have the political confrontation, political alienation. Some dichotomy was created because of any political circumstances. It gets changed. But certainly, we simply cannot say that the India has no democratic alignment. India has no democratic feature. And perhaps this is an absolutely false narrative to prove or to defame India's constitution. Now, the next point which we need to understand, and it is very imperative to understand in today's context, how we can practice the constitution. Because we all know it is quite good for our social status that we are the practitioner of the constitutional provisions. But in reality, it is like a partial truth. And for that, there is a need to understand why. If you focused on the thing, nowadays, all the individual from above 18, I will not go by below 18 group, I will just start from the above 18 because that is the universal adult suffrage age group, right? About the beginning. We all focused on one thing and we ignored the another important one. That is, we all deliberately focused or stressed over the importance of rights. But we intentionally, I will not say unintentionally, I will focus on the word intentionally. We intentionally ignore the word duties. Is there anyone among the participants who can help me to find out on whose suggestion fundamental duties was included in the Constitution? That is a quite significant question in this context. Based on whose suggestion? Anyone? No. It was Sardar Swaran Singh committee report who has suggested to focus on fundamental duties or to increase it. What was the latest fundamental duties or the last one? The last fundamental duty. Are any other fundamental duties in your mind? Let's not go for the last one or the recent one. Any other any significant fundamental duties in your mind? Any fundamental duty?
सर देश की अखंडता को बनाए रखें सभी नागरिक
यूनिटी एंड इंटीग्रिटी
मतलब
को बनाए
ये
रखें,
जी
अखंडता को बनाए रखें. ठीक है. एनी अदर?
ऐसा काम ना करें एक्ट लॉस के
किसके?
जो हमारे रूल है लॉज है उनके अगेंस्ट हो.
हाँ वही वो अखंडता की बात आ गई उसमें, क्योंकि अगर हम अगेंस्ट करेंगे तो फिर वो अखंडता के थ्रू ही जाएगा. अब अगर आपसे सवाल पूछा जाए कि क्या आप कोई मौलिक अधिकार और कैन यू जस्ट एक्सप्लेन मी और कैन यू जस्ट से एनी फंडामेंटल राइट? अब आप कोई मौलिक अधिकार का नाम ले सकते हैं, किसी भी मौलिक अधिकार या फंडामेंटल राइट के बारे में बात कर सकते हैं? कोई आपके दिमाग में हो फंडामेंटल राइट? राइट टू लिव,
राइट टू डू बिजनेस,
राइट टू डू बिजनेसेस, राइट टू मूव हियर एंड देयर, राइट? बोल रहा है
राइट ऑफ एक्सप्रेशन सर.
अपने आप को म्यूट रखें, जब कुछ कहना हो तभी अनम्यूट करें, डिस्टर्बेंस बहुत ज्यादा हो रही है.
Yeah, so thank you. The point is that we know that there is a fundamental right, like right to life, right to move and here and there, and above all, freedom of speech and expression, which is in always in trend. अभिव्यक्ति की आजादी है ना, अभिव्यक्ति की आजादी एग्जैक्टली लिखने की, बोलने की, अपने आप को अभिव्यक्त कर देने की, अपने थॉट और एक्सप्रेशन को, अपने विचारों और भावों को अभिव्यक्त करने के लिए, ये सब तो हमें याद है, लेकिन इन्हीं के साथ जो कर्तव्य हैं मौलिक, वो हमें याद नहीं है, कम याद है, कईयों को याद नहीं है। सही बात, सही मायनों में बोला जाए, कईयों को याद नहीं है, जबकि हम सब इन चीजों से, हम सब जितने भी यहाँ पार्टिसिपेंट हैं, कहीं ना कहीं किसी ना किसी कॉम्पिटिटिव एग्जाम को क्लियर करके इन चीजों को फॉलो करके ही लगे हैं अपने वर्क प्लेसेस में, लेकिन आज हमें याद नहीं है। क्यों? क्योंकि कर्तव्यों से हमें कोई मतलब नहीं है, ड्यूटी से मतलब नहीं है। What is the duty for all of us is 9 to 5. That is the only duty, because it gives you the idea that you are actually working for yourself and for your near and dear ones in terms of family. That is the only duty which actually ends, or which actually in our mind for long until we get the retirement, right? उसके अलावा तो हमारे दिमाग में और कोई ड्यूटी रहती नहीं है. And this is the only perception when someone said, or when someone asks us a question, what is dharma, right? So हम क्या बोलते हैं? Dharma is duty. Now the question is, which duty? If we are saying dharma is duty, kartavya, which duty? We are not able to keep these things. What are the fundamental duties? And what we are saying, dharma is just duty. But the question is, duties, okay, I accept. But what sort of duty? Duties toward your profession, duties toward the society, duties towards your families, toward your generation, towards your society, towards your community. What sort of duties you are fulfilling? What sort of duties you are talking about? Dharma is not duty, first of all. Dharma is not, we have heard so many narratives in seminar or conferences कि धर्म क्या है? Dharma is not like religion. Dharma is different from religion. I accept that. But how will you prove it that dharma is dharma is not like religion? It is quite easy to proclaim or to say that dharma is not religion. In many colleges, universities, in many symposium conferences, there are many intellectuals or political experts or philosophers who used to come, or proudly they said that dharma is not religion. My question is, prove it. Right? Merely just giving you a statement that dharma is not religion, how can you say that? There will be many contestation. Now the question is, when you need to prove it, and the answer is, dharma is nothing but just truth. Just truth. Dharma sirf satya ka naam. And all the approaches which help you to get the truth is dharmic. That is the dharma. आप कितने कर्तव्यों को याद रखेंगे? जब आपको संविधान के अंदर के 11 कर्तव्य नहीं पता, तो आप और कौन से कर्तव्यों की सूची बढ़ाएंगे? राइट? आज अगर हम किसी व्यक्ति को, आप सबने अपने जीवन में सुना होगा कि जब थिएटर्स में इट वाज मैंडेटरी टू स्टैंड इन फॉर द रिस्पेक्ट ऑफ द नेशनल एंथम, so there was a great contestation among the individuals that why there is a need to stand, why there is a need to give respect to the national monuments, symbols, national emblem and other things. And above all, one of the significant fundamental duty is, which I just discussed in previous session, to enlighten and increase the scientific temperament. व्यक्तियों के अंदर सभी प्रकार की समझ, तार्किक शक्ति को बढ़ावा देना चाहिए, राइट? ये चीज तो हम करते ही नहीं है. Whatever information we have received through WhatsApp, that is the ultimate information. That is the today's reality. How the public opinions are made. In previous session, we had a small discussion on public opinion while casting the votes. How the public opinions are made? By influencing the thought. It is quite similar to that process when somebody wants to do a good thing or anything, say let's not stick to the good or bad, but when somebody wants to do a thing, but another person deliberately change your taste and preferences. आपको खाने का मन है एप्पल, and someone recommend you, don't go for apple, try to eat orange. It doesn't make any sense, right? But someone simply influenced you. So that is the today's process of changing or making the opinion. Don't go by the issues, don't go by the agendas, don't go by the situation. Let's stick to the person. Let's stick to the ideology. Let's go by the party. Right? And that is the today's perception where the democratic feature of even modern political science of the modern political system has no space, has no relevance, and nothing to do with the empiricity or scientific temperament. So if you really want to practice the constitution, you need to understand the constitution unbiasedly, and you need to read the constitution without any pre-assumption mind. Without any mind that this constitution supports this ideology or that ideology. The constitution covers every possible ideology or every possible thing, but you need to understand it that merely having a belief that you are a practitioner of a constitution is not fulfill your real objective to be a real practitioner of the constitution. So I believe this could the best I could possible to make you understand how to introduce the constitution. Over to you, Akhilesh ji.
Thank you, Prashant ji. Now, participant session is open for the discussion. अगर आप लोग कुछ पूछना चाहते हैं सर से, online participant.
You are free to raise your question if you want to.
अवेलेबल है सर या वीडियो या उनको सिर्फ सामने ऑन है आपका?
Yes, sir.
कोई कुछ पूछना चाह रहा है सर से? मुझे लगता है कि कोई क्वेरी नहीं है किसी
Possibly they are satisfied. You know what generally we need to consider.
ड्यूटी के बाद सीधा घबरा गए।
Yes, sir.
No, it's okay.
We'll
If you have any question, any doubt, or anything in your mind, if you are not comfortable to ask here, I'll share my mail ID with Akhilesh ji. You can free to ask anytime if you want to.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your time.
कोई और पार्टिसिपेंट कुछ पूछना चाह रहा है? I think we are not getting any response. So that is all from. तो thank you, Dr. Prashant.
Thank you.
आप आए अपना टाइम निकाल के और आपने बहुत अच्छे से मेरे ख्याल से कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन को डिफाइन किया है और इट इज रिग्रेटेबल अगर मैं कहूँ कि भाई ये बात आपने सही कही कि भाई ड्यूटीज के मामले में जो है उसको इनलाइट नहीं कर पाए कि भाई कितनी हमारी ड्यूटीज हैं, शायद एक दो हम लोग बता पाए। और जबकि सिंपल है, जब आपने पूछा कि आपके पास राइट्स क्या क्या है तो 5-6 सब नहीं बता दिए।
Definitely. That is
ये डिफरेंस है और शायद यही आप इस कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के थ्रू कहना चाहते हैं कि परसेप्शन और माइंडसेट चेंज करने का टाइम है कि हाउ वी लिव, हाउ वी बिहेव और हाउ वी इंटरेक्ट।
Exactly, sir.
ठीक है, तो आपका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद कि आप अपना कीमती समय निकाल कर आए। ठीक है पार्टिसिपेंट, वी विल मूव फॉर ए 15-minute ब्रेक एंड देन वी विल रिव्यू सेशन।